This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, where we talk every week about books and research and other things that have caught our attention. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern, and this episode is brought to you by the Israel Democracy Institute, and it is a special part of a special series of podcasts in partnership with the Institute, focused on the Israeli elections in April. And we are making a special appeal here. If you like us, please show it. We need your support. Please give to our show by going to our homepage. That's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll down to the bottom and you'll see a big red button that says Patreon. Click on it and support us. Many, many thanks. I'm very pleased to welcome Gideon Rahat, who is a professor of political science at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and a senior fellow at the IDI. These elections, more than any previous ones, it seems, are focused on Netanyahu's personal fate as prime minister and perhaps as a free man as well. And we will ask now how personalized Israeli politics have become. Professor Gideon Rahat, hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hi, well, Israeli politics is very personalized. We had a very long process of party decline in Israel. In the old days, political parties were the main actors in Israeli politics. About 25-30% of the populations were party members. For example, these days, less than 5% in a good day. People are not loyal to political parties. In the old days, very few people would change their vote from one election to the other. These days, higher percentages. Indeed.
But does it entail really also lower loyalty to ideologies and ideas and policy? I mean, do they vote for a personality rather for an idea? I don't mind so much parties as a structure.
Well, basically, you're right. People can be loyal to either parties or to specific politicians, and this is true. However, the problem is like this when we look at it. Political parties have no personal life. They don't have hobbies. They don't have families. However, politicians as individuals do have. So politics is becoming more and more sometimes about unpolitical things, about the family life, about the hobbies, about the personal troubles of this person or that person. In this election, one of the most important issues is not the fate of the territories, socio-economic issues. It's the fate of a specific person who happened to be the prime minister and what will happen when he'll have his day in court.
So it's not really his fault, in inverted commas. The way the discourse is now structured, as you say, is just a product of the way Israeli politics have evolved. It's not Netanyahu himself, being the controversial figure that he is, who's made that outcome.
I think Netanyahu is a very good actor when it comes to personalized politics, but he did not invent it. Actually, it happened over the years that politics has become more and more personalized. Just for example, in the old days, nobody would even think about putting the name of the party leader on the ballot. And the first one to do it, I'm not talking about a few small parties, but the first one who did it was actually Yitzhak Rabin in 1992, Labor under the leadership of Yitzhak Rabin, and Yitzhak Rabin was so popular that I think he carried the Labour Party into victory. But then Netanyahu was already there. He was a young politician, and I think his personalized politics is very good for him. He is the best maybe in personalized politics, but he did not invent it. It's a process that happens. It's beyond the reach of a specific politician. However, I mean, he may be very good in it, but I don't think he invented it.
So if this is the way Israeli politics has been going for a while, why did the electoral reform of the 90s fail? And just to remind our listeners, it was a short-lived change to the political system in which Israelis voted twice for a list, for a party, and for a candidate for prime minister.
Well, the basic problem with the system, we used to have two ballots. So in 1996 and 1999, we came to vote, and we had two ballots, one for the prime minister and the other was for the political party. The problem was that Israelis as individuals, are very smart. They wouldn't give their vote to the prime minister and to his party because they now have two votes. They can do something else with the other vote. They could do. So they say, okay, I'll vote for Netanyahu, but maybe I'll vote for a party which is more religious or more about my identity as a Mizrahi Jew or more about my identity as a Russian immigrant. On the left side, it was also like this. So basically, we had a prime minister without a party to support him. And this is very, very problematic. I think the real solution these days, when you have personalized politics, is to have one ballot in which you will actually feel that you vote at the same time for the prime minister and for his or her party. And that's something that we try to promote at the Israel Democracy Institute. It's a very simple change in the law, which will say something like this. The head of the largest party is the prime minister after the elections, unless there is a majority in the Israeli legislature that actively prefers another government. And this means that when people will vote, they will know that they have a very good chance that they vote for also for the next prime minister. But the difference between what you asked, not having two ballots, having one ballot in which you select your candidates for the Knesset, and at the same time, you have some influence on who will be the next prime minister.
But the problem is that the reform that you're suggesting would make Israeli politics even more personalized, because they would discourage people from voting for sectorial parties and parties that perhaps represent their interests better, and vote for bigger blocs such as Likud or Blue and White or Labour, potential parties of government.
Yeah, basically you were right, unless the personal genie is outside. Now we have to, like you do for dogs, you have to put them and to teach them how to behave. So basically what we try to do is to put the genie back in the bottle. So we have personalized politics, and so we say, okay, people, we know that you do not vote for political parties anymore, or you don't think about them anymore, but you think about this. So we will let you vote for these parties. Now, if we have this kind of law, most of the parties will come together in alliances, and we will basically have two clear, like we have today, but two clearer blocks of political parties, one on the center left, one on the center right, and then they will probably compete neck to neck. So I think that would be some kind of actually returning the party, because the parties would be larger, they will have to come together. Politics is all about aggregating, about combining different views. So whether it happens before the elections or after the elections, that's the question. And I think for me as a voter, the more that I can identify who is going with who, what is the coalition, I think it's much more fair.
Well, why do you think that happened? The decline in the status of the party system and the rise of personalized politics. It's not just down to the people themselves. You say that Netanyahu is really talented at playing that game, but even if you look at the early days, Ben Gurion and Menachem Begin were really larger than life kind of figures who would have made excellent players in this game of personalized politics. Why didn't it happen then?
Well, I'm not sure about this, but I tell everyone this story, which is a true story. That's the history of Israel. In 1965, Ben Gurion, the founding father of the state of Israel, left the Labour Party. Labour Party did not exist. He left Mapai, and he ran his own party with Moshe Dayan and Peres and others. They win only 10 seats. And Mapai wins 45 seats, together with another small party. In 2013, Yair Lapid, not a founding father, very talented person, but not a founding father, ran on his own party.
Except if you ask him, right?
Well, I'm not sure about it also. I think that he admires Ben Gurion like all of us, with all the respect, yeah. So, and he wins 19 seats, which means that these days, it's not the same thing. And if you look at Ben Gurion and even Begin, when they had a fight sometimes they had conflicts with their parties. And most of the time, they had the upper hand. But still, they had a conflict with their parties. These days, they cannot have conflict with their parties because they are the party. If somebody is not in line with them, they kick them out. There is no legitimate internal opposition in a party. And if there is, they are kicked out. In the old days, there were always people who were in opposition to some or things or other things, even to Begin and even to Ben-Gurion.
Well, today, if you look at the Labour Party, for example, it looks like perhaps an old relic, right? Maybe that's why it's not doing very well, because they have a very strong party mechanism that elects really able politicians on the list. And actually, if you look at the list of Labour, at the Labour ticket running for election now, the leader is perhaps the most lackluster figure in the top 10. Do you think that's really why they're not doing very well? Because they've failed to put someone who's a good personalized politician at the top?
I think, unfortunately, you're right. And the thing is something like this. When we talk about personalized politics, we can talk about decentralized personalization, like people looking at all politicians, or we can look at personalized politics in which people focus on the leader. Now, if personalized politics in Israel would have been about the lists of candidates, I think you're right. Labour probably have a very good team. But people, as you said, are focusing on the leader. And, well, I don't know if it's true or not, because I don't think that anybody did really a thorough comparison between the leaders. But I think that Labour leader is not as popular as other leaders. But this is ridiculous. At the end of the day, when we come to elections, we in Israel, we elect party lists to the Knesset, to the parliament. So as voters, we would have, I think we suppose, to look who is going to be our representatives. However, we don't do it. So this is the problem with the gap between our system, which is highly partisan. We live in a parliamentary democracy and parties are the building blocks of it. We have a closed list electoral system, proportional system, in which you vote for political parties and we vote for people, for party leaders. And that's why I said, in order to close the gap, in order to return the genie into the bottle, we actually have to personalize the electoral system or the rules of government formation in order to put them into the context of the parliamentary system. And I insist that Israel do not need and should not have a presidential system or direct election for the prime minister, because it would make things even worse, as it was in 1999, in which we had prime ministers with no ability to do anything because the party system was even broken, even more than these days.
What about a regional system like there is in the UK and other places? Would that help solve the problem? Is that going too far?
Well, basically, Israel these days, as we know, is a single district. All of Israel is a 120-member district. And you raised the possibility that we will become like United Kingdom or United States. We will use single-member districts. I think that in this case, my dream is something in between. Like in many European countries, it's called multi-member district. We can decide, for example, that the district of Jerusalem and the area would send 10 members to the Knesset, and Tel Aviv would send 17, and the Galilee would send 6. It has to do with the size. Each district according to its size, and I think district elections are a very good solution for Israel, still proportional elections, because we will see more representation for the periphery. We will see political parties coming together, because when you use districts, the electoral threshold is growing even if you don't say anything. Imagine that you have district with 10 seats. So in order to get elected, a party needs at least more or less 10% of the vote. So it means that political parties will need to come together in order to win. Voters will have to vote for the parties that are more serious. So we will see less political parties and more responsiveness, because people will know how to identify their representatives. These days, just imagine, 6 million people have to identify who is exactly my representative out of 120. But if we will have small districts, and still not single-member districts, because we don't want, for many reasons, but you want to give Israeli society, with all of these differences, to let, for example, a secular guy that lives in Jerusalem to have at least one or two representatives, or a religious guy that lives in Tel Aviv, he will have, or she will have her representative, although most of Tel Aviv is highly secular.
Do you think there's any feasibility to that, as opposed to this little simple reform that you suggested about naming the leader of the biggest party as prime minister directly? This would require quite a bit of a change in policy making, in legislation, but also in the political culture of this country.
I'll tell you basically something it's maybe ironic. If we will adopt this change, I don't think that things will change so fast. I mean, the power of political parties will not be affected in a day. It will be something that would not hurt the existing parties and politicians so much. Direct election hurt them much more. But direct election seemed like, a small change. You just elect the prime minister directly. And this change that I talk, it looks like, a huge reform. So that's the problem. That's the problem of promoting this reform. It's not a radical reform. It's quite, I think, it makes sense and everything, but it's very hard to promote it.
I wanted to ask you about other places in the world that have a similar system to ours. Are they dealing with the same kind of erosion in the status of the parties as institutions and the rise of personalized politics? Is this something that we see really across the board?
Well, basically, we had me and Dr. Ofer Koenig from the Israel Democracy Institute. We just published a book about party decline and political personalization. And unfortunately, we find out that the two leading countries in both terms, in party decline and political personalization, and in political personalization by far more than other countries, are Israel and Italy. And if you know the politics of Italy, it's not a very quiet politics. I wouldn't say it's the model for democratic politics. Italy is a model for food, for many things. But in politics, they are not the best. So I think that Israel fighting neck to neck with Italy about who is going to be more personalized, who is more about personal politics, about party decline, this is not a very good result.
But maybe it's just a reflection of the dysfunction of the system. I mean, both systems are so dysfunctional that they allow for the rise of personalized politics.
In a way, you're right. I think if we had reformed the electoral system in the right direction 20 years ago, I don't think we would be in the same place. If we wouldn't have direct election for the prime minister, we would be in another place, because even though we abolished direct election for the prime minister, I don't think that we ever recover from it. People are still talking about party leaders instead of talking about political parties. And we see the party system did not return to what it used to be. Just to give you numbers, in 1992 elections, Labour Party won 44 seats, Likud won 32 seats. These days, when you win elections, you get 30 seats. So you can see party decline in Israel is amazing.
But wouldn't it have happened regardless of that reform in the 90s? I mean, this is just the way things are going. So going back to a question I asked you earlier, how do you explain this great decline in the status of parties?
Well, basically, the great decline in the status of political parties have to do with the decline of the politics of cleavages, of people having very close affiliation with specific parties through civil society groups, etc. But in Israel, this is not a symmetric process, in my opinion. The left has lost its power in the unions, in the Histadrut, everywhere. Leftist people in Israel are clearly more individualistics. As they say in the movie Life of Brian, they are all individuals.
Except me.
Except me, yeah. So, but I think on the right, on the other hand, they still have their very close affiliation with the synagogue, with religious, with tradition. Now, if in Europe we can say that party declined at least part of it, because the church has declined and the unions has declined. In Israel, we can say only that the unions has declined. The church did not decline, the Jewish church in this case. So I think there is something like this. So a decline mainly when we look at political parties. For example, the voters on the right are more loyal than the voters on the left. The voters on the left, on the center left, as you can see, each election they have a new messiah that is coming to save them. It used to be Lapid, now it's Gantz, and they return to Labour Party and then they leave the Labour Party. So I think that in Israel, what is interesting about Israel is that you don't have a symmetry there between left and right. So the right is still playing maybe the old partisan politics, although the right-wing parties were never as strong as the left-wing parties. So I think that's part of the game.
I wanted to ask you again about this loyalty thing, because maybe that's really Netanyahu's biggest achievement. Because if you look at just 10 years ago, or maybe more, 15 years ago, when Ariel Sharon was prime minister, and he broke away from Likud and took away a large chunk of the Likud votes and brought Likud under Netanyahu in 2006 to its really worst result, I think, in the history of the party. At
Likud
least
won only 12 seats
12
in
seats.
2006, and you're right, this is even worse than Herut, the old Herut
Yes.
in the 60s. Yeah,
So maybe this great loyalty on the right that you're talking about is really Netanyahu's great achievement and his great asset as a politician, and really whipping it up is really what he believes, with a great deal of justice, would ensure his re-election and political survival.
Well, basically, it's about Netanyahu, but just I'll give you one number, which, Netanyahu have more than 2 million likes on Facebook. The Likud party, as much as I remember, have 60,000. So what happened to Likud after Netanyahu? Netanyahu is Likud, Likud is Netanyahu. This is the power, and this is also the weakness. Likud cannot do without Netanyahu. The right cannot do without Netanyahu. And this is the secret of his power, because I think many in the right-wing parties support him, not because they like him. Maybe they don't. And, there are politicians there that also want to replace him. But they all obey him more or less. They support him. And they support him because of this, because he took over politics, he took over the Likud, and he's personally very, very strong. And let's imagine that he can rule for decades. But, one day we are all immortal, even us.
No, you don't have to look that far. It's pretty likely that in a year's time he will be indicted and have to wage a legal battle, that he may not be able to survive politically, and then he'll be forced to resign. And then what happens? Do you see like a political void that awaits us?
Well, basically it is very likely if he and the party that support him continue to obey the rules of the game, the democratic rules of the game, that even the ruler is not above the law. So if this will happen, there will be very interesting developments here, because Netanyahu, at the same time that he made himself the leader, took care to see that nobody really grows around him. Nobody can really challenge him within his own camp. And even the challengers, those who try to challenge him, really have hard time. Gideon Rahat from within Likud. Bennett and Shaked, you can see they have 5-6 seats in the opinion polls, and they might have even less. So, you're right. If he will leave politics, it would be a very interesting new game. It's not the same like Begin left Likud. This was really dramatic, but there was a party there, a strong party, that took over. They had these fights between different people in the party, but they could survive. It's not even Labour Party, Ben-Gurion is leaving, they bring Eshkol. That's not it. I think after Netanyahu, we will have a very, very interesting game here.
So the loyalty that you're talking about of the voters on the right will be put to the test. And as I understand from what you're saying, it will not be as guaranteed as it is today. So maybe after all, the loyalty goes to Netanyahu specifically and personally, and certainly not the right-wing party, but also not right-wing politics, right-wing ideology.
Well, basically, if we look at loyalty in Israel, loyalty is very low when it comes to political parties, but loyalty is quite high when it comes to political blocs. Not many people are moving from the left to the right or from the right to the left, maybe through the center or whatever. So there is very few people that are moving from right to left, from left to right. So most of the people who voted for Netanyahu, after Netanyahu would not be in politics, will vote for the right. There will be a very strong fight within the right. And then, once again, we can see that Gantz, for example, they will try to grab some people from there. And if they will be able to grab 20% of them, that's a victory, because we all fight. Politics is all about grabbing the voters in the center, the median voter.
Yeah, and then you don't need that many, because there's almost always a balance between the two blocks. Oh, with a slight advantage to the right, but that could be easily unraveled.
Yeah, I mean, even in the forthcoming elections, the result may be decided not directly by the vote, but by the fact that one or two or three parties would not pass the electoral threshold. And that's the reason that it can be decided like this, is because the difference between left and right is not huge.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting time to be alive, and in Israel it's really a perennial truism, so we'll leave it at that. Professor Gideon Rahat, Professor of Political Science at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and a Senior Fellow at the Israel Democracy Institute. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And also big thanks to Gizem Ozdemir, our sound engineer, and to Georgia Foscarini and Itai Shalem, our producers, and of course to the Israel Democracy Institute for their generous support. And I would like to ask you this. Many or most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app, and we would like to ask you to consider writing us a review. You can also support us by going to our website, that's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review, and subscribing onto our Patreon campaign. Check out our archive. It has more than 500 interviews. If you like what we do here, you can also like us on Facebook. Our page is called the Tel Aviv Review Podcast, Ideas from Israel. And don't forget to follow me and Dalia, who will be back with us shortly on Twitter. Join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, goodbye.